Hello and welcome to this lecture on innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Christian Albano from Concordia University, Wisconsin School of Pharmacy. There's my contact information as well as my LinkedIn profile for those of you who wish to get connected. As a good source, and there are many good sources on entrepreneurship, whether it be textbook, website, documentaries, shows, and for-profit organizations and non-profit organizations that want to help you build your business, there are a lot of resources. This is one of them in terms of a book, kind of a 24-step to success to a successful startup called The Disciplined Entrepreneurship by Bill Ollett. You can see that this is one of his models in terms of the pathway to successful startup, 24 steps. And you can kind of see how it kind of curves, turns, and there are steps that you can bypass, but at the same time there are steps that you may have to go back to as well. So a good resource, a popular resource used by many entrepreneurs. And this is just showing the same model, the same pathway. It kind of reminds me of Candyland or Chutes and Ladders. And there are the six themes that your entrepreneurship, entrepreneurialism, and your business plan should have. And they're kind of also detailed there at the bottom. I know it's in small print, but you can attain this one-page model in Google, but just by Googling Disciplined Entrepreneurship and Bill Ollett. But the book is also a good resource, so if you do have a little bit of cash to spend, purchasing it might be a good idea for your overall business planning. In the previous slide, there is a video called Chance Favors the Prepared Mind. If you have a chance, please view the YouTube video by Steve Johnson. It's a great animation of basically a 30,000-foot view of innovation and entrepreneurism with some detail and with some examples in a very short video format. Along the lines of having a successful startup, and once you have your product or service, it's important for you to market it. It's important for you to advertise it. And so this slide is just speaking to pitching your innovation or pitching your idea, and that you will have to also speak to the demand or the need, as well as, again, pitching, which kind of speaks to the emotional aspect of not only your product or service, but you yourself being kind of emotional about your product or service so that people can get excited about it. So this is an example of an innovation that is also serendipitous, meaning that sometimes a little luck is involved. So Dr. Tanier, a French obstetrician, was concerned about infant mortality in France approximately late 19th century. So as he one day passed a zoo and was watching a zookeeper taking care of baby chicks, and how baby chicks are cared for in a very early age. In particular, a incubator, or what the French call a couvassier. Dr. Tanier thought, well, why can't babies also be in a similar warm chamber that might be helpful in infant mortality? So put these two together, the obstetrician plus the zookeeper, the very recent movie, Zookeeper, with Kevin James as the actor. And what you get when you cross these two, you add these two, you get the very first baby, one of the very prototypical incubators, again called Couvassier. And related to that, sometimes when you are an entrepreneur, you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, no pun intended here. But sometimes you might develop a product or service that does the exact same thing as what you are trying to accomplish with replacing an older model, for example, but perhaps it just might have different materials. In this case, these are another baby incubator of the future with recycled products, so very environmentally friendly. Currently, personally, I work as a mentor in a entrepreneurial/innovation program called the I-Core program with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And it is with I mentor a team called vibetech.com. They are involved in rehabilitation and exercise medical device that helps to treat pain, that helps treat low mobility, helps to improve strength. And in particular, right now, they're targeting the older population, the gerontology population, and their technology is related to vibration therapy. So similarly, I have had experience in the past. I've worked with engineers trying to develop a exercise chair that would be both functional as an office chair as well as an exercise device for strengthening and cardiovascular exercise. All right, so focusing on our learning objectives, we will focus on, what are the characteristics that it's needed in entrepreneurship, and we'll talk about intrapreneurship as well. Many of you will be working for companies, and you can still be an entrepreneur. So that's related to intrapreneur. We will talk about different strategies of operational effectiveness. So for you to be an entrepreneurial, you have to have a plan. You have to have some experience in business planning. You have to have some experience with management. You have to have experience with trying to operate your plan out to an efficient way so that you can capitalize on your venture. We'll talk a little bit about other ways that innovation is stimulated within organizations. In particular, we'll talk about learning organizations, which is kind of a buzzword within the business academic community and in corporations where they are trying to be entrepreneurs. Lastly, we talk about economic analysis. I have this here in this lecture because I think it is important for you guys to also understand the financials of starting a business. And although it's in this lecture, I will stop short of covering too much. We will talk more about it in pharmacoeconomics, where you'll get quite a bit of training in health economics and trying to do these kinds of analysis and learning these terminologies like cost minimization, cost effectiveness, and cost utility and cost benefit analysis. So in healthcare, of course, it's important to be innovative. Healthcare is constantly changing, and leaders and managers need to be innovative for you to stay ahead of the game. What is innovative? Where you can, and we can categorize it in two ways, or at least two different kinds of innovations. Those two being breakthrough innovations as well as incremental improvements. So breakthroughs are things that are very transformative. For example, a blockbuster drug like a statin drug when it first came out, and more recently with lifestyle changes, for example, Viagra. And then incremental improvements. So things that are already existing, products, process, services, but you're just adding a little bit to it. And one example is in retail, when in retail pharmacy, your main focus is obviously drugs and medications, but perhaps, for example, with Walgreens, they're trying to differentiate themselves with other added services, more clinical services. So is that incremental? More incremental than breakthrough, or as well as providing other foods and services. Like, interestingly enough, you can get sushi at Walgreens, so that could be considered incremental. And probably the most important aspect of this slide is that innovations, products and services do look at enhancing what we call the triple bottom line. So is it improving the people? Is it improving the planet or the environment? As well as maybe also very importantly for a business, is it adding revenue as well as is it profitable? As a way to introduce innovation, I like to introduce this slide that shows Dr. Jim Carlson of what was once called PHAR546 Institute. PHAR546 Institute is a contract research organization, or a CRO. Dr. Carlson is a pharmacist who started PHAR546 about almost 30 years ago. He was one of the pioneers and leaders in terms of testing generic drugs in terms of safety and efficacy. So clinical phase 1 research is Dr. Carlson's bread and butter, and that's what made him a millionaire. So interesting enough, innovators, which Dr. Carlson is one, they have a way of being very focused, being able to work very hard. They have a way of usually are very good at communicating their product, and as well as Dr. Carlson was very inspirational in terms of getting people to work together and even persevere through failures. Okay, so what a generation makes. Interestingly enough, again, almost a generation ago, if you were old enough to remember some of these advertising and marketing campaigns with respect to accessories for mobile devices. So if you remember our cell phones and our PDAs, right? They weren't quite smartphones yet, but when you had so many of these devices, you needed extra pockets. So interestingly enough, the new Dockers mobile pants had a lot of pockets for your technology. But now, of course, pretty soon, hopefully, now we have the Apple Watch, which still has to connect via Bluetooth to your Apple iPhone. But one of these days, it will just be that one device that will take care of everything. I've been involved also in research in heart rate monitors, so I have an interest in health technologies with respect to devices, and in particular wearable devices. So if you have an idea that you would like some assistance or help, and I would more than be happy to at least try to get you to the right person or help you directly. So you want to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, so there are certain characteristics, and we'll talk more about characteristics, but this is just a good way of showing how some of the academic research that goes on into, the difference and similarities, or how social cultures as well, impacts the way that you are going to start a business. So with respect to kind of social culture or social norms that will impact certain messages that you yourself might intrinsically analyze, and that also imparts the way that you're going to start a business. So things that are traits or characteristics like self-consistency or personal efficiency are just good traits to have when it comes to wanting to be an entrepreneur. So this is a textbook on innovation and entrepreneurship that just wanted to show in terms of some predictors of being an entrepreneur. So what is the concept of entrepreneurship? So it's a practice of organizing, managing, and assuming the risk of a business. And innovation further creates focused change within your own business or in an organization that you might work for. And of course, for many businesses, this is viewed as something that they have to do. It's necessary for growth and progress. So we mentioned in the learning objectives trying to differentiate between an entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. So entrepreneurship viewed as a function of sole proprietorship or in a small organization. So it's you, maybe a small group of partners, family or otherwise, that is trying to develop a product or service that will be obviously profitable. And then, of course, this can occur within a bigger organization. So then we call this entrepreneurship. So places where you might potentially work at some point, Walgreens, Abbott Labs, Prax Research, formerly it was also bought out by another CRO called Cetero Research. But make a long story short, it's Dr. Carlson is trying to revamp the business again because he did retire, but is coming back. So, yeah, because within a corporation, sometimes in entrepreneurship, there is certain trade-offs. There's less risk because it's an entire organization that's trying to become an entrepreneur, and so perhaps spending resources is very minuscule compared to a sole proprietorship where they might be spending quite a bit of money. So the risk there in a sole proprietorship is definitely much greater in terms of losing money, but perhaps the gains are much bigger with a sole proprietorship and not as much as an entrepreneur within a corporation. Interestingly enough, you can consider yourself an entrepreneur if you ever think about franchising. So if you are once you finish your pharmacy degree or within your pharmacy degree, you decide that you want to own your own pharmacy, you can be an entrepreneur as well as a franchisee by working with, for example, the Medicine Shop Pharmacy, where they are a franchisor and they would be more than happy to work with you. And of course, there are the trade-offs of working for yourself as well as working for a franchise. So what are some of the key steps in the process of entrepreneurship? Well, you obviously are going to define an opportunity or address a problem, right? And within that context, you might have to obviously develop and collect data collection and do some analysis. And one way to do that is through what we call business canvas, SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or the 5 forces analysis. These are just ways for you to kind of outline your business model. Okay, so once you have developed a business canvas, or done a SWOT analysis, 5 forces, and you have a business plan, I should put that down probably literally is to have a business plan, then you start to build support because now at this point you have this evidence of why your product or service is going to work and is profitable. You need to start to build support. You need to mobilize resources. And then maybe one of the hardest aspects of entrepreneurship is actual execution. So executing the product from startup to all the way to the finished product of actually getting the company sustainable. Or if it's internal, obviously executing that product, service, or process to completion, and then completing the venture. I think it would be worthwhile to just compare and contrast entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, because I think from a student perspective, it's good for you to reflect, and perhaps this would give you kind of a taste, if you will, of what might be best suited for you. Okay, so there's some autonomy within both, but obviously as an entrepreneur, you are working within a corporate hierarchy. You are working for a business, so there might be a lot of people that you would have to get approval from. Okay, you might have more than one boss, for example. Entrepreneurs have an existing support network. This is a positive thing. As an entrepreneur, you'll have quite a bit of resources at your hand. When you work for a Walgreens, when you work for a big pharma, you'll have quite a bit of tools, and you may not have to spend a whole lot yourself to complete your innovation. So, but on the other hand, entrepreneurs also face a lot of personal financial risk. And so that means that you might, as if you're going to start your own pharmacy, you will have to get you might have to get money from family, friends, and banks and investors to obviously help you with building your business. In entrepreneurship, the name and reputation to your product or service, the Walgreens, the brand, the CVS, I mean that brand is quite global, so that's obviously going to help you with respect to commercializing and having a very successful product. In entrepreneurship, image and reputation must be created over time. Yeah, so if you're a sole proprietorship, you don't have the experience or the background of the Nike swoosh, that's the branding, or the Air Jordan brand that would automatically give you recognition. That's something that's developed over time. We mentioned a little bit about serendipity when we talked about Dr. Tenier and developing the baby incubator. So again, similarly in pharmaceutics, it's interestingly enough that 1/3 of all drugs on the market, have been aided by a little bit of luck. And this just shows you, again, it's in 2008, so publication that was titled "Discovered by Accident, Viagra is Still Popular 10 Years Later." So obviously, we're almost coming up to that 20-year time point where, again, Viagra initially was tested in a different indication, which was for lowering blood pressure in particular pulmonary hypertension. But obviously, those who were in that clinical study probably did not want to give the drug back as a result of some side effect. So I think it's also important, as we step back a bit, to look at a few models that would also help you put together your plan. So when you think about writing your business plan, you must also look at some of these entrepreneurship views. And we have what we call micro and macro views of entrepreneurship. Basically, micro kind of looks at internal factors, whereas macro kind of looks at external factors. So with respect to micro view of entrepreneurship, if one thing that we equate this with is that you actually have control or direction of where your product or service, your venture is going. So we call this internal locus of control. So there are 3 schools of thoughts, meaning that there are entrepreneurial traits that will impact your internal locus control. There are the venture opportunity. You will have some sort of internal locus of control, as well as your strategic formulation. So let's take a look at these one at a time. So traits among historically successful entrepreneurs. So Steve Jobs of Apple, he obviously is very successful entrepreneurial. He had a high need for achievement. He did not like to conform. High energy level, probably slept very little at certain periods of time. Risk taker. And emotional intelligence. So meaning that not only were they very cerebral in terms of their thinking, but at the same time, there was a certain cognitive emotion that they really had an understanding and grasp of. They were obviously persistent and determined. They were creative and obviously had quite a bit of technical knowledge in a field like computers. Okay, so with venture opportunity, this is the area of, how well can you seek out resources? How well can you obtain resources, develop them, implement your product, your process or service? So there there's going to be multiple ways. I mentioned in the beginning that you'll have quite a bit of resources to start your business plan, whether it be textbooks, whether it be online websites. Right here in Wisconsin, when you do start up your company, there are going to be companies, there are going to be agencies, there are going to be nonprofits that can help you. So nonprofits like Bridges to Cures, and Dr. Sem is obviously has a Dr. Dan Sem, our former faculty member, still is an adjunct in our pharmacy school, although now he is the dean of the business school. He has a nonprofit organization called Bridges to Cures that helps out primarily pharmaceutical related companies, startups, to help in terms of business planning, in terms of resource attainment, and everything else in between. A company like Bridges to Cures can help you. And they have other, Bridges to Cures is partners within other organizations in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin as a whole as well. So the Wisconsin Technology Council, this is a place where an entrepreneur in Wisconsin would definitely want to target, because they can provide you with resources from intellectual property to creating patents to perhaps provide funding. Similarly, a company like BioForward, this is another nonprofit agency that wants you to succeed. So they will help you in developing your product or idea. Okay, so just as an example, in terms of seeking opportunity as a pharmacist or manager, being creative and being market aware are also key traits that are important in being an innovator. Okay, this is very higher level kind of thinking in terms of your business plan, but you do have to have a, a strategy. Okay, so planning for your effectiveness. That's what strategy formulation is. Are you good at leveraging specific resources, right? So are you able to not only find them, but again, leverage your resources so that you can optimize and be very effective. Securing slack resources, right? So this is the idea of you better have an abundance of resources versus less constraints. And if you do have constraints in your process, meaning there might be some limits or limitations to fulfilling your business, that has to be very strategically be teased out so that they don't impede in your way. So whether that constraint is money or something related to another form of capital, that's important for you to address. Okay, so it's very, view it as a central management principle. In terms of business management, there is always some kind of corporate strategy, there is a business strategy, there is a technology strategy, and these strategies can be, although siloed sometimes, they are integrated and overlapping. Here's just a picture of Microsoft stores a couple of years ago, right? We all know the popularity of not only Apple products, but Apple Store. So of course, Microsoft had to do the same thing. Hopefully with their new products, they're already on the Surface 4 and they've come up with a Surface Book, which looks like a MacBook or a Mac Air killer. Is that the case? Yet to be seen. Okay, so the macro view now focused on things that are sometimes beyond the control of the entrepreneurial. So these we call external locus controls. Sometimes, unlike internal locus of controls, where there's quite a bit of internal control that the entrepreneur can perhaps make impact right away in terms of possible changes. Again, we talked about the traits, we talked about strategy. So those things that you yourself as an entrepreneur can change. But these you can't change. The environmental factors, financial capital, economic factors, displacement these are key factors in external locus of control, or the macro view of entrepreneurship. What are environmental factors? So this involves certain aspects of institutions, including values and norms that create the infrastructure of your entrepreneur. So, is it a culture of innovation within Walgreens? Is it a culture of innovation in big pharma? Big pharma, I would have to argue yes, but perhaps in Walgreens, not so much, because they are focused on certain aspects of retail pharmacy. Another picture of Prax Institute, a CRO a company that I had worked for as a medical writer, and whose main bread and butter was doing safety and efficacy studies of generic branded drugs in terms of, again, safety and efficacy. There wasn't a whole lot of innovation here. In terms, we had our bioanalytical process to assess, ADME, absorption, digestion, metabolism, excretion of drugs, and then pointing out adverse events. So there wasn't a lot of innovation in terms of the chemical processes, analytical process. However, there was quite a bit of ways of perhaps improving a process, especially in the medical affairs area where I had worked as a medical writer. We could always find ways to improve our medical reporting, our statistical analysis, and regulatory and data analysis. So financial capital, obviously the economy is going to be very crucial in terms of impacting your business when it is a recession period. We all know that not many people have a lot of disposable income to purchase items relative to when there is no recession and things are in good times, if you will. And so related to this, you will have to figure out ways to, again, get money. If you need money for your business, is going to be through venture capital, seed monies, cash flow management within a company is going to be very important if they're going to support your innovation. What is displacement? So displacement, these involve recognizing that the choice to be an entrepreneur may be related to being prevented, redirected, or displaced from conducting other activities. So this is the idea that perhaps we mentioned economic factors, but here we will also look at political factors. So perhaps when we talk about Democrats and Republicans in terms of the market, we know that Republicans like the idea of free markets, and so they want less regulation, they want less government involvement, they want the market to dictate a product or service. And so perhaps when the Republicans are in office, that perhaps that there are greater opportunities for entrepreneurship and business enhancements. Cultural factors, speaks to, in America, yeah, sometimes the bigger is better, and so the approach of marketing to Americans might be obviously a key strategic approach, if you will. I mentioned the Nike swoosh earlier, as well as the Nike Air Jordan brand. I heard that along with Nike Town, I think there is a Air Jordan store that will again open up in downtown Chicago on the Magnificent Mile. So amazing how one person, one basketball player, not only ruled on the court, but also rules now in retail. Of course, when you are the best and the biggest, sometimes people are going to come after you. And it was about a decade or so or more ago when Nike was investigated for child labor issues in third world countries where some other products were being made. So this is just a kind of a snapshot on kind of people not liking or not necessarily aligning their beliefs with Nike as a result of those child labor allegations a number of years ago. So we're going to switch gears, and we want to provide you now with, related to this successful entrepreneur, the Bill Ollett textbook on entrepreneurial startup, the disciplined entrepreneur. They have that's one process. Well, here are three more. What I want to say about these processes include that although they might seem separate, there's quite a bit of overlap between them, and that you might not necessarily follow one, but you might kind of mix and match between two or three of them. So let's look at this is the formation process of entrepreneurial events. And so in this process, we know that the variables or factors are not isolated events. So factors or variables such as personal. So we talked a little bit about traits, entrepreneurial traits. We talked a little bit about how the culture or sociological factors, networks, teams, parents, family, role models, this might impact your process. We've talked a little bit about companies or organizations, how team strategies, the structure, your product can be impactful. The environment, what's happening within the environment in terms of the opportunities, the competition, resources, even government policy. So this process, we know that variables can impact the process in any stage. So from innovation to some triggering event to implementation, which I told you earlier is one of the hardest aspects of starting the business, is can you implement what you just strategized to do? And then finally, growth. So again, it articulates that the four distinct events are associated with effective entrepreneurial activities. I mentioned the four: innovation, triggering events, implementation, and growth. And each are influenced by these factors that I had mentioned, including some examples like as in the personal, sociological, organizational, and environmental. Other key dimensions of entrepreneur, so team or individual initiated. Again, do you have slack resources to deploy the extra resources that might be needed? Is management, what is the management style? What is the management of entrepreneurs? And is there a risk-taking involved within your particular company? This is an assessment approach, so this kind of emphasizes if you are very analytical, perhaps this is the best model for you, because then you are assessing who you are as an entrepreneur. You are assessing the venture that you're going to get into. You are assessing the environment, all in a qualitative, quantitative, or strategic or an ethical manner, which all impacts who you are as an entrepreneur in terms of your development as in an early stage, in a mid-career, and late stage. So interesting how, again, you would want to kind of look at a lot of these theories and kind of superimpose them on top of each other to come up with your process, which kind of speaks to this multi-dimensional model approach. So it proposes that 4 broad categories must be considered in assessing your success of an entrepreneurial endeavor. You know, who you are as an individual, what is the environment, economy, and or otherwise. And if you are within an organization, looking at the entire culture of the organization, and of course, having an understanding of what are the processes, which model would you choose, and so on and so forth. They're very dynamic. When you look at these models, they're not static, meaning there's just not one linear path, but it's curvilinear. It is multi-directional. Again, showing a Dr. Carlson, because he utilized all these processes and approach to starting this contract research organization that was very new to the world of pharmaceutical industry. And in fact, the FDA and Dr. Carlson worked quite a bit in terms of developing some of these regulations in generic drug testing. Interestingly enough, Dr. Carlson suffers from dyslexia, so he always kind of mentions that as a key trait. It's just a key trait in terms of being an entrepreneur. Interestingly enough, as well as he mentions it as a motivational tool to, I think, internally, think of himself as always kind of an underdog. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about innovation. So, obviously, to be an entrepreneur, you have to have an innovation. And for an organization, it's always good for them to assess, obviously, internal and external resources. It's important to sometimes, if you are going to be an innovator and entrepreneur within a company, do they have a research and development department? And of course, again, speaking about the economy and the market conditions, sometimes those conditions are important in terms of strategizing and having operational effectiveness. We talked about Walgreens for quite a bit, so there's a very nice timeline that you can get from their website in terms of where they've come since their inception of making malt shakes and being the first corner drugstore to drive-through to obviously having a award-winning app that helps with everything from prescription refills to printing photos and more. Okay, so this is a little bit more recapitulating, a little bit redundant from earlier, but again, to hone in on the strategy that is needed involves a business plan. So that business plan might involve a business canvas, doing a SWOT analysis, and Porter's 5 forces. Asking questions to the customers, having focus groups, very important in terms of having a well-rounded product. And of course, with all companies, they're always trying to strategically position themselves to have a competitive advantage. We've talked about operational effectiveness. So what is it? So conducting activities that are similar to competitors, but doing it in an effective way. Okay, and it's effective because perhaps you can do it faster. You will have better quality. You will reduce cost. These are just to name a few. And you might, because of some of your training in operations management, perhaps you have a business degree in operations management. You got your MBA, perhaps you've done some training in TQM, total quality management, re-engineering, Lean Six Sigma, benchmarking. These are just some disciplines within operations and some tools and skills that's needed to be operationally be effective. In pharmacy, sometimes we look at implementing, for example, a computerized physician order entry system to reduce dispensing error. This is just one example of perhaps operational effectiveness. Understanding of the market, understanding of the innovations that are out there, trying to identify gaps, trying to be innovative in your strategies even is very important with respect to coming up with the next and greatest thing. Again, kind of the difference between breakthrough versus incremental strategies. Again, speaking of breakthrough versus incremental strategy, so that's what you'll have to ask is breakthrough innovation sought versus incremental innovation when you are working for Walgreens? It might be more incremental rather than breakthrough, whereas when we think of breakthrough innovations with respect to pharmacy, it's with big pharma. What is the next greatest drug that's going to cure cancer, that's going to cure diabetes, so on and so forth. Okay. And as related to strategy, is innovation desired to increase the organization's growth, status, capacity? These are important questions that you ask of yourself as a company. The difference between breakthrough versus incremental. So is it a creative disruption? That's another business lingo that's used to define a breakthrough innovation. An example would be re-engineering a healthcare facility to utilize cost-effectiveness technologies. Incremental innovation, so sometimes we use it to complement breakthrough innovations, not necessarily having to reinvent the wheel, so to say. But these are things like mobile apps, sushi at Walgreens are other examples. Breakthrough, we mentioned the example of Viagra. Obviously, that last bullet there, sometimes we don't say it, but sometimes it is important to say that breakthrough is obviously not just done by one person, but it is done in a team approach. Okay, so examples of incremental innovations, what are things that can be done to improve dispensing? Obviously, when we talk about humans versus robotics, there is some breakthrough there. When we talk about counseling in pharmacy, there's some hint of breakthrough there, right? You weren't allowed to do counseling in the past, and now in many states it is law. Compounding, that this is a key skill that pharmacists do. So, is there something more that you can do in terms of compounding innovations? Wellness programs, so just in healthcare in general, thinking of primary prevention and public health, thinking about genetics, genomics, personalized medicine. Thinking about opportunities within the healthcare sector in general. These are just examples of more ways to have breakthrough or incremental strategies. So thinking about healthcare reform, which before it was signed, March 23rd, 2010, it was kind of unexpected. Then boom, it hits us all at one time. Thinking about systems incongruities, so thinking also about systems thinking. System thinking is very buzzy right now in terms of in academia. If you can implement systems thinking, this is a way for basically efficiency throughout an entire system. Process improvement, changes in industry, increased aging population, pharmaceutical disparity, behavior, so changes in consumer perceptions, mood. These are all areas that can be looked at for new breakthroughs and innovations. How do we promote innovation? It depends. It is structural within, it could be structural within a company. It's also very cultural within a company. Okay? And then within that company, when we think about human resources, is this something that they select for? Is this something that they do development for? Is this something that they evaluate? And so you can bet your bottom dollar, those big tech companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, they all have this in mind as a way to strategize on innovation. Okay? And we'll look at in the next couple of slides. We'll look at how what are the differences in structure of a company and why you'd want to work for a company because of their structure and culture. So structural variables are associated with innovative success in a sense that when you have the proper structure, this is very forward thinking. This is perhaps supporting your abundance of slack resources. There's a high degree of communication. And we'll look at this organic versus mechanistic organization. So next slide shows the difference, mechanistic structure versus a organic structure. The mechanistic structure looks very bureaucratic. So if you remember studying government, or if you are in the military, bureaucracy or bureaucratic, this kind of speaks to a very bureaucratic way of the process. Okay, you can see all the characteristics. There might be high horizontal differentiation. There could be high rigidity in relationships. There are fixed duties and roles. Very formal. There's formal ways to communicate. There's also a centralized decision authority. And then we can kind of say conversely, look at there's low horizontal differentiation, meaning that sometimes you're equal with everybody else. There's high degree of collaboration, both vertically and horizontally. There's, in terms of roles and duties, you have to be very adaptable. It's a culture of you can wear many hats, for example. There's low formalization. There's not a lot of formal titles, for example, that might not be. There's a manager, assistant manager, executive manager, director, assistant director. Many of those titles that speaks to hierarchy are sometimes removed. Okay, so cultural variables include rewarding appropriate risk-taking behaviors. Those are encouraged. We spoke about human resources, right? So do you have training, development opportunities? Okay, for a company, motivating employees to become innovative requires assessing needs, identifying barriers, providing resources again. Of course, a reward system. And lastly, the continued motivation for employees as well as promoting the behaviors. Okay, so that learning or that mechanistic or organic organization is kind of like this learning organization. So it embodies continuous improvement, positive forms of conflict, transformational leadership, teamwork, innovativeness. You can kind of see that some of these characteristics is really suited for a team environment, right? Also, it speaks to, getting it done, get her done, the get her done approach. Here are more characteristics that you can read right out of the textbook. And here is again the learning organization is an organic organization. So this is where I'm going to cut it off. I do want you to just kind of swiftly peruse some of this managerial considerations that's related to finance as well as economics. We will go through this in detail in pharmacoeconomics class, but I thought it would be a good idea to put this here for you to, those of you who are evaluating or coming up with your business plan, that you do want to have certain aspects of health economics and financial economic analysis. Thank you very much. We will see you soon.